Hey class, let's get into studying Christianity. Two things generally happen when I start into the Christianity section. First of all, in the discussion thread, I start seeing the use of pronouns, I and we. And this doesn't happen very often in Hinduism. People don't write, we do puja in the morning to, in my house, we do it to Krishna. So something happens, right, once we're in a territory. And remember, studying religion at the university can be weird. So once we're in a territory that people are used to moving around in, they start speaking first person. And so I hope you will catch yourself if you do that and think, wait, I need to take that step back and represent the information accurately using my academic persona. The second thing that happens is that this is the quiz that gets the worst grades. Same problem. People are used to, for instance, they might know the Nicene Creed in their sleep, and yet you open up a quiz and you have a question about what was Athanasius's position on the Nicene Creed, and it looks like Greek to you. That's a joke. But so an assumption of familiarity makes it harder for people to actually grasp what they need to nail down in their studies. So I hope this intro will help warn you of those 2 points. Let's keep trying to work from an academic persona in our study of something that is likely to be more familiar to you, whether or not it's part of your religious tradition or you know, if you've got one, if you've spent much time in American culture, a lot of this will seem familiar. So keep it foreign, keep it exotic, learn the material. Now, begin with Flesher's Exploring Religion pages. Those just seem to be a nice window into the traditions. And then when it comes to the book I think is a little bit difficult, because it starts by giving you the kind of cartoon version of here's Jesus and this is what he did. And then it starts backpedaling and telling you a very complicated version of how to think about this simple picture. So we need to go from that story with which we're familiar into the more complicated picture. And I want you to think of that, the reason we've got the big mosaic here. I want you to think of shifting then from a kind of basic outline into the idea that there is a complex mosaic that we put together in order to understand Christianity. It's got as many different pieces as the 27 books of the New Testament, and there are also multiple frames. There are things like a sociological frame, where you look and think, how did the rise of Constantine's empire impact what Christianity became? And so that is a different frame than if you're simply looking at what was the difference between the Orthodox and the Western Church's Bible, right? Those are so it's like, not only do you have a mosaic, but when you turn it a little bit, then different pieces of the mosaic come forward and move backward in terms of what gives us a more complete and academic picture of Christianity. So the first mosaic I want you to think of is the one we can put together from the sources written most closely to the time of Jesus' life. And so that's going to include Roman, Jewish, and apostolic writings from the region. So anybody who thought it was worth commenting on would have been, that were near enough, would have been writing from a Roman, Jewish, or apostolic perspective. It's our first century mosaic. It includes the development of Jewish Christian communities who kept going to temple, for instance, but also considered Christ to be the Messiah, who created a new covenant. So these are people who, you were Jewish before he came, just like he was, and you were still Jewish after he was crucified, but you thought of him as a Messiah. And so you're trying to make sense out of a world in which the Messiah was killed. Then again, we have Paul working at in this same century to open the covenant beyond Jewishness. Luckily, we've got 2 weeks of figuring out what that means. But Paul then reads Christ's life as a new covenant, open to the Romans, for instance. So then we end up with power struggles happening between people who are Romans wanting to be Christians and Jewish communities that are going to be Christian. So that's pretty interesting mosaic. Now, the 2nd century mosaic is largely a matter of putting together pieces in 2 directions. First of all, you've got Roman persecution of Christian communities as they kept bubbling along. And that's causing pressure then from the outside onto the tradition. And meanwhile, you have internal struggles among Christians regarding what's heretical and what's canonical, right? So they're wanting to record and get the story down. Is the gospel according to Mary part of the canonical story, or is it not? You probably remember just recently the Gospel of Judas, when that one was discovered. So that was one that never made it into the canon, correct? So you have internal things happening, and you have external pressure from the Romans still. So that's a 2-directional mosaic. The 3rd century included Christian martyrdom, so Christianity as underdogs, but then it shifted toward a new kind of imperial power, Christians as conquering heroes, with the Edict of Milan and Constantine's strategic embrace of Christian ideals. So importantly, Constantine's desire to reduce the internal struggle among Christians prompted him to support a series of councils in order for the Christians to arrive more peacefully to a condition of internal cohesion. So you could think of Constantine a little bit like John Boehner and Republicans right now, kind of a sense of how would I orchestrate cohesiveness? And Constantine said, let's just bring you all together and start hashing out these issues that you guys are chewing each other up over. So this was when the Nicene Creed gets pounded out, and the huge division between the Church of the East, the Greek-speaking that would become the Orthodox Church, and the Church of the West, the Latin-speaking, that becomes the Papal Catholic Church. Now, note that during the councils, there were several hundred bishops from the East, but only 4 bishops from the Latin West. This helps you to understand the significance of the Eastern Orthodox Church for the early Christian community. And that's an element of Christianity that not very many in the American context, unless you're in a big city with urban centers that have a Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox church, we don't end up having that much popular awareness of how important the Eastern Church was. So the first use of the name Christianity is from about 40 to 44 Common Era in Antioch. Better find Antioch and think to yourself what that means. Is that part of East Church, West Church? The word Christian is a Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah. Hence, even the word Christianity is built like a mosaic. It's a translation, a Greek translation of a Hebrew word. If any of you have seen the movie Lost in Translation, you can appreciate just how heterogeneous then this early world of Christianity was. The multiple languages, whether you were Jewish or whether you were outside of Judaism, an Eastern church, a Western church. What do you think it would have meant for a first century Jewish person, go to first century, who'd witnessed the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, right? We all know that now. To consider attending meetings and prayers and discussions centered around a Greek translation of a Hebrew word. So, having witnessed the destruction of the temple, were you now going to consider attending a Christian, a group that's identifying Greek translation of a Hebrew word, or are you going to read that whole crucifixion and loss of the temple and move into rabbinic Judaism, start simply gathering in your homes to continue doing Judaism, figuring, well, the world's not much different. Guess he wasn't the Messiah, so let's do our Seder, right? And think about how radical it would have been at the time. You've lost your Holy of Holies if you were Jewish. And you might start considering literally the name of Christianity as a name for yourself. I was trying to think whether in our contemporary world that would be like somebody deciding that maybe, since the word Yahweh, God, and Allah all come from the same root, maybe I will try to consider approaching the divine through the word Allah. That would be an interesting thing to do in America right now. So think about what kind of upheavals in the Jewish community, in a Roman community, considering this new monotheistic crucified leader as a Messiah. Very interesting. So there's a process of translation that occurs in every significant element of Christianity. What was the Passover? What did it become in translation? Right? So the Passover was the Last Supper, and it leads to the development of the Eucharist in Christianity. That's a translation, process of translation. What was the death of Christ? What did it become in translation? The resurrection, for instance, becomes a translation of the Hebrew idea of covenant. Christ is read as a new covenant that moves Jewish people away from the need to sacrifice at the temple, and the new covenant is for all people. So the ethnic identity of Judaism is translated into a universal and missionary religion. That's a huge translation process. Clearly, some people are not going to go there in that process. So the book often lists key factors in numbered points. 7 ways that Jesus was different from John. 4 causes of the spread of Christianity. 7 councils. 4 reasons for the Great Schism. And think to yourself here, metaphorically, figured out how those number factors fit into this mosaic, right? A little bit of like a paint by numbers thing. Or how would your 4 ways that Christianity grew figure into a mosaic of what is Christianity? So during the first week of our study of Christianity, you should be able to describe from the position of your academic persona the first 3 century mosaics, the growing rift, second, the growing rift between the Eastern and Western churches, and third, the different Bibles used by the East and the West. Good luck with it, and remember, keep it strange.